All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Eyes on ICE webinar with Witness and Immigrant Defense Project. We're going to go ahead and get started here, and we're super excited for everybody to join us today. The level of interest in this webinar has been really uplifting, but at the same time kind of a grim reflection of the moment that we're all living in. So to get started, my name is Jackie Zamudo. I'm the program manager for the U.S. work here at Witness, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. But before we dive into the presentation, I wanted to give a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today and just touch on some basic logistics for the webinar. As you know, for years, immigration agents have surveilled and targeted immigrant communities, often acting in abusive and traumatic ways only seen by immediate witnesses. We know that most of you are currently working with and in communities at risk of raids, and we're all trying to figure out effective ways to fight back. So today, we're going to talk about one of those ways, which is documentation, and more specifically, video documentation. I do want to preface this with a note that video is not a magic wand. A video on its own is unlikely to result in justice, but when used strategically and combined with some of the other creative organizing and advocacy tactics that we're seeing right now, it has tremendous power to expose abuses and bring about change. At the same time, we need to prepare to use it in ways that are safe, ethical, and actually advance our causes, as well as prepare for what to do if filming is not an option. So that's what we're going to tackle today. I also want to note, I'm going to try and speak up a little bit for those of you who can't hear me. And I do want to mention that our colleague Dalila is on the line helping troubleshoot some tech issues, so please send a message if you're not able to hear, and we will continue to try and improve this. I want to let you know that we're planning a second webinar in this series on July 18th. That one will be more focused on rapid response and organizing and advocacy strategies. And we're really excited to have grassroots partners leading that webinar like Make the Road, and more to be announced soon. So we'll follow up with everybody with some details. A few important things to keep in mind as we get started. Everyone in the audience should be on listen-only mode. Please do keep your mics muted and camera off just in case so that we can stay focused on the presenters. Again, if you're having any technical difficulties, you can send us a direct message in the chat box or the question box. You can also send us an email at feedback@witness.org. Towards the end of this webinar, we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes for question and answers. And in addition to our two presenters today, we'll have Darius from the Center for Constitutional Rights on the line to help with some additional legal questions. You can submit your questions using the question box on the lower right-hand side of your screen throughout the webinar. If you're calling in on a phone, again, you can email us at feedback@witness.org. We might not get to all of the questions today. We only have 1 hour, but we are planning to do a follow-up blog post that responds to some of the most frequently asked questions here. And on a similar note, we are recording this today. So we are planning to send out both the presentation and the video of the recording as soon as possible once we wrap this up. We are also planning to produce Spanish translations of both the video and the slides. So we'll keep everyone updated as soon as that's available. And finally, if you're on social media, please share what you're learning today using the hashtag #EyesOnIce. And quickly again, as I mentioned, I'm Jackie, as you can see in this kind of strange picture of me here. And I'm here with my colleague, Polly Makam, who will be presenting some practical tips for filming safely, ethically, and effectively. Both of us work on the U.S. program here at Witness, which is an international human rights organization that trains and supports activists, lawyers, journalists, and others to use video and technology to document abuses and advocate for change. A lot of our work around filming the police and authorities has been informed by our partners here in the U.S. as well as allies working on similar issues in countries like Brazil, Mexico, Kenya, and Malaysia. We're really excited to share these learnings with you, and we're also super excited to learn from you. So with that, I will pass this off to Michelle Paris from Immigrant Defense Project, who's going to talk about some of the great work that they're doing there and how they're supporting this fight.
Okay, hi everyone. We're just going to get this loaded up now. So as Jackie said, my name is Michelle Paris. I'm a staff attorney at Immigrant Defense Project, or IDP for short. You can follow us on Twitter at ImDefense and get updates on what we're doing. At IDP, we fight for fundamental fairness for immigrants accused or convicted of crimes. We advocate against the systems of mass incarceration and mass deportation that are largely impacting Black and brown communities across the country. We've been tracking, requesting information, and training community members on immigration raids and arrests for the past few years. So I'm excited to be here to talk about one way for organizers and advocates to think about fighting back against these unjust raids that are tearing communities apart. So today's agenda, first we'll talk about the power and perils of filming immigration agents. We'll talk about how their tactics impact the ability to film, and then we'll get into some practical tips for people who are actually planning to film on the ground. So let's start out by making clear who we're talking about. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE as we'll call them today, is the federal agency that sends agents into communities to arrest, disappear, and deport people. They are under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security, and for decades now, they've been using dehumanizing terms like criminal or illegal to justify the detention and deportation of millions of people. So why focus on documenting ICE? Well, first of all, during a lot of our Know Your Rights trainings, people are always asking about videotaping ICE. As Jackie said, filming can build power and support. It can also come with serious risks. So as ICE ramps up its mass deportation machine, we wanted to talk about what community groups and rapid response networks might think about when training members or developing protocols around documenting ICE abuses. At the same time, we want to acknowledge that ICE is not the only state actor surveilling, policing, and displacing immigrants. And so it's really important to ground ourselves in a holistic approach, to seek alliances across movements, and to consider challenging ICE practices as just one piece of broader work. So first, let's talk about what filming can do. It can help community organizations verify reports and rumors of ICE presence or raids, especially when there is a lot of fear and confusion. Many of our communities, especially in urban areas where Black and brown people live, are over-policed. And just seeing any officer can trigger panic and the spread of misinformation. So seeing photos or video may help rapid response networks verify or debunk rumors quickly. Documentation of ICE abuses can be evidence or support in individual cases. So first, let's talk about immigration court. Proof that ICE violated a person's rights, for example, by entering a home without proper permission or consent, can help certain people challenge the evidence against them or even get the case thrown out. Also, though, people could use this proof to sue the government for damages for violating their rights. One example is that Make the Road New York reported a raid of a member where ICE agents literally broke down the door to an apartment, pulled out guns, handcuffed a man, and searched the entire place, including a room where children were sleeping, all to arrest someone who no longer lived there. The member took a photo of the man, her husband, handcuffed by the agents, and then after the raid took photos of damage to the door. Neither of them were actually arrested and taken out of the home by ICE. So this wouldn't be about immigration court evidence, but maybe proof if they wanted to sue for something like the wrongful arrest or the break-in by ICE. Filming can expose human rights abuses and help communities challenge state violence. We've seen this in places across the country like Ferguson and the movement for Black Lives. We've seen international movements built around the idea of seeing it, filming it, and changing it. And this is just a reminder for us to constantly think about the bigger picture work around changing the narrative and movement building. Now, just to quickly highlight some of the perils, obviously we know with power comes responsibility, and we are in an era where ICE is trying to take the mass deportation system to a scale that we've never seen before. We're also in an era where many politicians are increasingly criminalizing protest. So this means that we have to be extremely careful when thinking about sharing. Safety. So filming could be unsafe for you or those around you and/or lead to arrest. Agents are only concerned about themselves and their own perception of safety. So grabbing your phone while ICE is trying to arrest someone can escalate the situation and may even lead to ICE agents becoming aggressive with you or others. So it's best to assess the risks before filming and sharing. Just a few takeaways. Filming is a powerful tool for change, but we have to be careful in using it. And we're going to emphasize this throughout the webinar, but let's not forget that there are many ways to document besides filming. So how ICE tactics affect filming. Understanding ICE tactics is a foundation to figuring out how to respond quickly to reports, develop protocols, and train community members on what to expect, including how to film. And I would just note that these tactics continue to change and can be different in different locations. For example, in densely packed urban environments versus rural places, in localities where police cooperate with ICE versus places where they don't. So we need to continue sharing information about what's happening in our communities so we can learn from each other and stay adaptable. One huge challenge to filming is that generally ICE raids are designed to catch people off guard. So most people don't know that ICE is actually looking for them. So it can be hard to plan or patrol in the way that those who have developed, for example, Cop Watch have done. ICE raids are also geographically spread out. ICE agents arrest people all over, and it is difficult to predict where they will be at any given moment. They're not supposed to go to certain sensitive locations like schools or religious institutions, but they even arrest people right outside of those places. So in many ways, they're everywhere, but most importantly, they don't generally congregate in one neighborhood and go door to door. So they're much harder to track and catch up with. Many ICE raids take place out of public view and in homes, and this can take away opportunities for the public element of filming and bearing witness to state abuses. So community members in households at risk of a raid, not just responders, should be trained to film if they want to or to document. Also, it may be useful to think of even tighter networks of people in close proximity to those at risk who can bear witness at a moment's notice. So for example, if someone lives in an apartment above a store across from a church, trying to engage shopkeepers, cashiers, pastors, to be able to bear witness at a moment's notice. Just be aware that we've heard about ICE in the past collecting phones in a home so that witnesses can't call others. And they'll pretend as if this is for their own safety. So ICE wants raids to happen without public scrutiny or involvement. So we really have to consider that when we're planning strategy for our networks. Another challenge to filming in the moment is that people often only realize they're immigration agents after a raid. And this is hard because ICE agents often present themselves as police, making it hard to identify themselves. Sometimes they work with local police. So Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, as you can see on the vest there, is a branch of ICE where agents supposedly go after criminal organizations like gangs and do so often with local police. So a recent example, which I've linked there at the bottom, was in Santa Cruz, California, where police did gang raids with HSI and the immigration agents ended up arresting undocumented people who had nothing to do with the raid but were present. This highlights the importance of rapid raid response networks joining forces with people working to challenge police abuses and mass incarceration. Beyond just announcing themselves as police, another reason that people often don't realize who's at their home until it's too late is because ICE agents lie to get inside. They typically don't have a warrant that gives them the power to enter without permission from someone who lives there. So they trick people into letting them inside, usually by making up a story about a police investigation. Once they see the person they want to arrest and confirm the person's identity, that's it, they'll detain them. They've also done this to arrange meetings with people in public places. So they say things like, someone who's robbed a limo is on the run, can we show you photos to see if you know any of the suspects? Or your loved one was the victim of identity theft, can we talk to them? Or it was reported you were in a car accident, we need to inspect your car to confirm that you weren't. For more information on these types of lies, which are often referred to as ruses, I would just recommend that you check out the toolkit that IDP created with the Center for Constitutional Rights, which will be linked later. Oh, and one more point. I've linked at the bottom to an LA Times article on ICE presenting themselves as police, which does include a video of ICE agents doing that during a home raid. So another opportunity and challenge is that ICE agents usually go out looking for a specific person they want to arrest, usually based on data that they have or some other kind of information sharing, but they frequently conduct raids in the presence of witnesses. So under President George W. Bush, ICE would go looking for a specific person, but detain anyone else who was undocumented and present. And some people call these collateral arrests. They prompted a lot of lawsuits and bad press, and Obama mostly stopped the practice. ICE under Trump, though, has already started doing this again, and it will probably happen more and more. This means that it can be difficult for witnesses who are at risk of deportation to feel safe to film during a raid. At the same time, broader sweeps like worksite raids create more witnesses. So based on the history and current practices, we think ICE is likely to try to intimidate or harass witnesses, especially as Trump's ICE conducts more collateral arrests. So witnesses should consider the risk of violence, arrest, or deportation if documenting. This may mean that if one person in the household is not at risk of deportation, the plan should be for that person to be responsible for documenting. This also means that it's really important to emphasize safe practices. As ICE looks to expand its dragnet, they're going to expand the use of social media and information and data sharing to identify people to target. So it's important to assess the risks, not just of filming, but also of sharing. So let's talk about what types of details might be important to document about a raid. As I mentioned, since ICE agents usually don't have the right type of warrant to enter a home without permission, they use all kinds of shady tactics to get into homes. It's really important to document how ICE agents got into a home because it can help someone in court if ICE violated their rights. So some examples of things people could document if force is used, for example, property damage, from the force used, so like in the example I mentioned before about the damage to the door, intimidation like loud knocking or yelling, or ICE agents staying outside of a home for hours until somebody lets them in. The last big example or big bucket are agents telling lies that make people feel like they have to let the agents in. So for example, a fugitive is on the run, we think he's in the house, we need to come in. There's a gas leak in the home. It's really important to document examples like this. ICE agents sometimes do extensive searches in homes without proper warrants or permission. So they may say they have to do a protective sweep for safety, but often they'll start looking under beds, in closets, or drawers, and people should exercise their rights by saying they don't consent to any searches and document if ICE violates them. Again, this can help in court. ICE agents sometimes engage in racial profiling. If people believe that an ICE agent approached or questioned them solely on the basis of their race or ethnicity, they should document that and explain why. For example, if the person is the only Black person in a car and ICE only pulls them out for questioning or arrest. ICE agents often refuse to show warrants when asked. They refuse to identify themselves often, and they refuse to listen to residents who mention how children or other vulnerable people are present. Sometimes, as I mentioned, they conduct raids near sensitive locations like schools. Sometimes they dismiss important information like the need for medication or childcare. Document these things. Even if they don't help in court, they can garner public support and expose the broader impact of raids. They can help the public understand that despite what they say, these people are not doing some kind of public safety service. And we just want to emphasize, again, that there are many ways to document. So people have successfully challenged ICE in courts for years without video, without photographs. So keep that in mind. We wanted to point out some other ways to document, including interviewing witnesses on camera right after a raid, writing down what happened, using security camera footage, and sometimes ICE agents will leave voicemails, again, like the example that I gave about your car being in an accident, we need to meet you. It's important to save communications like that, which can be another way to document what happened. So the takeaway is it's important to identify people at risk of experiencing an ICE raid, including U.S. citizens, tell them about the ways that ICE is conducting raids, and help them plan for documentation in case of a raid. You want to document ICE abuses, especially where agents use force, intimidation, or deception. And even if a witness didn't film, think of other ways to document the raid. Ask relevant questions about abuses and write down answers as soon as possible after a raid. For more information on the tactics ICE agents use, a long history about how ICE agents have conducted raids for decades, summaries of over 200 individual reports we have gotten over the course of 3 years, and other information on ways to fight back, we recommend, again, that you check out our toolkit created with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Also, we have Know Your Rights materials for community members in 16 languages, and I just want to point out one additional resource, which is a poster. It's kind of like a choking hazard poster to hang in the home. It has a basic script with rights information, but also specific questions and lines to help people document what happened during a raid. Mi Gente also has a great detailed raid evidence collection form, which I've linked here, with questions to ask for encounters with ICE outside of the home, so for example, during a car stop or workplace arrest. Okay, let's talk briefly about your right to film. It sounds like maybe somebody who's a presenter might need to mute themselves. Okay, so first of all, it is legal to film ICE and law enforcement in public in the U.S. so long as you don't interfere. This includes U.S. citizens, people with lawful immigration status, and people without status. It is important to film openly, since some states have laws against secret recordings. So this means it's probably not best to hide your phone in your pocket and record. It's important not to interfere and to back up if they order you to do so, or you may face arrest, or it may limit or stop your ability to actually document. Just a couple of notes of caution. Even if they tell you to stop filming, you have the right to continue so long as you aren't interfering. And while there are limited situations where they can take your phone, beware that they may do it legally or illegally. So now I'm going to turn it over to Witness for some more practical tips on filming.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So thank you again for being on the call today. As Michelle said, I'm going to be reviewing some tactical information about how to actually film ICE. So I wanted to start off by flagging a case that's currently stalled at the Supreme Court. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy named Sergio Hernandez and his friends were playing a game of chicken near the border between Mexico and El Paso, Texas. So they were, daring each other to run up to the border fence and then running back really quickly and then doing it again. So there's actually cell phone video that shows Sergio peeking out from his hiding place as Border Patrol Agent Mesa points his gun from the American side of the border and fires 3 shots, killing the unarmed boy from 60 feet away on the Mexican side. So Mexico charged Agent Mesa with murder, but the U.S. refused to extradite him. So Sergio's parents sued Agent Mesa for damages, claiming that he acted in violation of the U.S. Constitution when he killed their son. However, it's being argued that the Constitution doesn't extend over the border. So as of May 2017, the case is still stalled in the Supreme Court. So the reason why I wanted to point out this case, besides obviously highlighting this horrific injustice, is because the video shot by a witness on a cell phone camera from the Mexican side of the border aired on Univision and was then picked up by CNN and other mainstream news sources. So as you can see by Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor's statement, the eyewitness video contradicts Agent Mesa's statement that he was, quote unquote, surrounded by people throwing rocks at him, and that he gave verbal commands to them to stop and retreat before he fired his gun. So our hope is that the following tactical tips for filming ICE can help people to more safely, ethically, and effectively film and share those videos to help secure justice. So let's get into the tips for documenting ICE. Number 1 is to simply be safe. ICE is more concerned with their safety than yours, period. We're living in a situation where there are false narratives being proliferated about immigrants, portraying them as dangerous, as criminals, as gang members. These narratives make it easier for ICE to claim that they feel threatened or in danger during raids and encounters. And as we've unfortunately seen, courts favor law enforcement, especially when they can make the argument that they acted a certain way out of fear for their safety. So we don't want to do anything that can give ICE more reason to claim they felt threatened and potentially harm us in the process. It's also important to remember that ICE is often entering a raid with amped up energy. So moving quickly or suddenly to grab your phone or reach into your pocket to grab your phone could in fact escalate the situation. So it's important to assess these different risks before you do decide to film. So remember that you are the best judge of the situation. If you feel unsafe, scared, if you're getting a bad vibe, don't do anything that will put yourself or the person being detained in further danger. Anyone who's ever had an encounter with law enforcement or immigration knows just how terrifying it can be, and it's honestly meant to be. So I walked into protests and cop watching situations prepared and with experience, and have still decided that it wasn't safe to film because something just didn't feel right that day. So your first priority is always safety, and there's no shame in not documenting a situation through video. As Michelle mentioned, there are other ways, other important and effective ways of documenting an encounter with ICE, including writing details down or filming damages after an encounter or even recording audio. And a lot of these tactics we actually recommend even if you do end up filming in the moment. So it's important to prepare before you even find yourself in a situation to film. There are different things you can do to ensure that you're digitally more secure and prepared to film ICE. So number 1, avoid the fingerprint ID to lock your phone. Use a number passcode instead. Law enforcement can't force you to give up your passcode without a warrant or a court order, but they can try to get you to unlock your phone with your fingerprint. Number 2, have a legal support or trusted contacts information handy. Consider memorizing it if possible, or posting the number somewhere in your home that's clearly visible, kind of like the poster that Michelle mentioned that Immigrant Defense Project offers. Number 3, secure your electronic devices. Your phones, your computers, iPads, all of them. These devices often share information between each other, like your email account or photos from the cloud. So it's important to secure all of your devices. Encrypt your phone, regularly back it up, and delete sensitive data like images of or contact information for anyone at risk of deportation or arrest. Number 4, clean up, delete, or disable your social media profile, especially if you're familiar with or in contact with activists and people targeted for deportation. We do know that the Department of Homeland Security surveils social media and uses facial recognition to track people. So this is something that you should really be doing regardless of whether or not you're going to be filming ICE. Another thing you might consider doing, if possible, is setting your phone to automatically back up photos and videos to a platform like the cloud. So in 2014, Kianga Mwamba was driving home late at night in Baltimore when she saw police beating a handcuffed man. She stopped at a red light to record the scene from her cell phone. Officers told her to pull over. The scene quickly escalated. Officers were yelling at her to get out. They forced her to the ground, tased her, and eventually arrested her. So Mwamba's phone continued to record throughout the incident, and the audio actually captures much of what happened. She was eventually charged with resisting arrest, and when she was released on bail the next day and given back her belongings, the video was gone from her cell phone. But luckily, her phone was set to automatically back up photos and videos. So even though it wasn't on her phone anymore, she still had it saved to her Google account. So her attorneys were able to take that video to internal affairs, and 6 months later, the charges against her were dropped. So film the details. Filming key details during an encounter with ICE can help your video to be more admissible as evidence and to just generally tell a clearer and more complete story of an incident. So when filming, it is important to stay focused on ICE instead of civilians, especially when people's immigration statuses are in question. So you can make targets or people being harassed harder to identify by filming really wide shots, so people's facial features are harder to pick out, or by filming their backs or their feet when possible. It's also helpful to try to capture the full scene by getting varied shots with your camera. So mixing close-up shots, medium shots, and wide shots can potentially help give a lawyer or anybody watching the video later a better and more clear understanding of the situation. If it's possible, film key details like badges, license plates, weapons, communications between officers, and any other agencies working alongside ICE, like if there are police officers present or the Department of Homeland Security. These details can help identify law enforcement who lie or use harmful tactics at a later point, and they can even help give an idea about where in the chain certain commands came from. You also want to try to make it easier for investigators, journalists, or lawyers to verify your video by filming the context. So context can be street signs, buildings, landmarks, or other identifying features of an area. But remember that if you are filming inside or directly outside of someone's home, you don't want to expose details of their living situation without getting their consent, because otherwise you could be putting them or their family members at risk of retaliation from ICE. Also important, if you see any other cameras filming in the room, like surveillance cameras or body cameras, capturing those on film can also be helpful in verifying footage down the road. For example, if a lawyer is watching your footage and they see there was a parking lot security camera also filming, they could try to obtain that footage and use it to verify details or even get another important angle of an incident. So anything said or learned during an arrest can be used in court against the victim, meaning the person filming or sharing the video should be careful to not say anything in the film or on any social media posts about the victim's country of origin, their immigration status, their criminal history, anything. So the video should really speak for itself as much as possible. But if adding narration won't interfere with the situation, it can help give context at the beginning or the end of a video, like how many ICE officers are present, identifying weapons, or any other details that might be important to point the viewer's attention to. But it's important to remember that this narration should be factual and as unbiased as possible, not emotionally charged. Emotions are obviously extremely hard to temper in tense situations, so that's why we often recommend not adding any commentary, just because it is difficult to do. And if violence does occur, try your best to stay calm and quiet, because lawyers and investigators will need to hear what's happening in that moment. So your first instinct after filming an encounter with ICE might be to post the video on social media, which makes sense. It's an easy and quick way to garner support and attention for what you just witnessed. But immediately uploading your video to social media can actually pose threats to you, the person being targeted, and their families, putting you all at risk of retaliation from ICE and other law enforcement. It could also potentially harm any future advocacy or legal work around the video. So it's incredibly important to first just take a step back and pause. For example, you might want to consider posting the video after law enforcement makes an official statement. So posting before might give them an opportunity to change their statement to match the video. But as we saw with Sergio Hernandez's case that I shared earlier, those differences between the eyewitness video and the official statements could be very important. So be strategic and thoughtful, and if possible, speak with the family or the victim first. Getting support from a lawyer or a journalist or a local advocacy organization can help you figure out the best, safest, most effective way forward. So when Ramsey Orta filmed the death of his friend Eric Garner at the hands of the Staten Island police, he gave the New York Daily News exclusive rights to publish the video and permission to credit him for filming the incident. After that video went viral, Orta and his family were repeatedly harassed and targeted by police. Orta is actually in prison right now, serving a 4-year sentence for an unrelated charge. He has since actually said that if he could do it again, he would have released the video anonymously without his name attached to it. So keeping this story in mind, it's important to note that protecting identities and other sensitive information is the #1 priority when filming immigration-related events. So be aware of what information may be associated with your phone. For example, if you have your location services turned on, you're gathering GPS coordinates with your footage. Those coordinates could potentially trace footage back to the person who films. And as I mentioned earlier, we know the Department of Homeland Security checks social media. So be aware of this. Before you share, determine if you need to protect anyone's identity. YouTube actually offers a free blurring tool that you could use to blur out someone's face and help keep their identity safe. Live streaming events is another popular tool, but this poses even greater security risks because you won't be able to make some of those important choices in the moment around how to keep someone's identity safe. But if you really need to live stream, you should consider streaming it on a private channel to just a trusted set of viewers, like an attorney or trained legal observers. But if you do use a private channel instead of a public one, we advise you to assume, but even if you do use a private channel instead of a public one, we advise you to assume that law enforcement are also watching and monitoring those live streams for information about specific activists, protests, or demonstration locations, and so on. So please proceed with caution when live streaming.
Sorry, this is Michelle. You cut out when you mentioned the technology for blurring faces. So can you just repeat that before you go to the next slide?
Sure, thank you. So something that YouTube actually offers is a free blurring tool that you could use to blur out someone's face and help keep their identity safe if you do share footage. So preserving your media. So this is something that people don't often think about, and it's also where people tend to start tuning out during a training. So hopefully no one on here has tuned out, because learning how to preserve your footage is actually very important. Preserving your media correctly can strengthen the likelihood that it'll be used in court. So make copies of your footage and save it in different secure locations. I try to save everything I shoot on at least 2 separate hard drives. One is portable and one stays secured at my home at all times. Never edit or delete the original copy. Don't even rename the file. You can name the folder in which you store the file anything you want, but don't change the actual file. You want to keep that preserved exactly as is. This is to ensure that people can't discredit the integrity of your footage or claim that it's been manipulated in any way. And if you do want to make edits to footage, like blurring out faces with the YouTube tool that I mentioned, you can do so from a copy. So I think that we've covered how this type of visual documentation can be important to counter law enforcement and hold authorities accountable. But I wanted to also quickly note the importance of sharing stories that counter the false and harmful narratives that we hear about immigrant communities far too often. So this picture is actually a screenshot from a film directed and produced by Perla, a youth activist from the grassroots organization Make the Road New York, an amazing organization that's actually going to be presenting on our next webinar. So Perla's film tells the story of her journey crossing the border into the United States from her point of view. And it's actually been used as an educational tool in community groups and classrooms, and was even screened at the UN for the International Day of Migration. So if you are interested in learning more about how to create videos like that one, the basics of filmmaking, tips for conducting interviews, or if you are looking for more in-depth information about things we talked about today, you can visit our library at library.witness.org. Our entire site can also be found in Spanish at es.witness.org. So if you can walk away from this portion of the webinar with only one thing, hopefully you're walking away with more than that. But the most important thing that I really wanted to drive home is understanding just how important it is to protect people's identities and privacy. Video can be a powerful tool if used correctly, but it's our jobs to make sure that we're not giving them any more ammo. We're not giving ICE a chance to use footage against us, to target and surveil us, and harm us or our neighbors. So this step is changing on a daily basis. It feels like every day there are new insights into tactics ICE is using, new interpretations of the law, of how video and technology can be used for advocacy or even for surveillance against us. So it's important to stay tuned and to listen and learn from the incredible groups on the ground who have been working to protect and strengthen immigrant communities for a very long time, way before this current administration. So on that note, I'm going to pass it back to Jackie, who will be facilitating our Q&A today. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Holly and Michelle, for all of that useful information. And thanks to all of you on the line for listening. We're going to go ahead and jump into the Q&A session right now. So if you haven't already submitted your questions in the question box, please go ahead and do so. To get us started, I want to point a question at Darius from Center for Constitutional Rights. This is one that came up in some of our own conversations, and I'm hoping that it'll be helpful for everybody. But we were wondering if there are any risks associated with sharing or essentially exposing the identities of ICE agents through photos or videos. Is there any chance that they might retaliate against you, and how can you try to avoid this?
So thank you for having me on this really important webinar, first of all. The answer, I think, is that it is definitely a risk. And, you know, ICE agents, like other law enforcement officers, do not take kindly, in many situations, to having their bad actions, their bad conduct exposed and put out there for everybody to see. Now, obviously, as public officers, as public officials, they have no right to have their identities shielded from public view because they are public officials and they are engaging in their course of their employment. So legally, you should be allowed to do that. In other words, you do have a right to post footage and share footage of ICE agents engaging in misconduct. The problem is, as with many other rights that we have, in practice, those rights are not always respected by ICE agents. And so there definitely is a risk of sharing it because, as I think was mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the tactics that ICE uses is that they do go on social media and they do investigate and track people's social media activity. And so to the extent that who records an ICE raid or records an ICE agent engaging in misconduct, and they do share that on that social media and that is then discovered by ICE, they could retaliate. And this is, I think, particularly a danger in a jurisdiction where, again, you are not allowed to record things secretly. And so if the recording was made secretly and then is shared, that actually could expose you to potential, legal action. But even beyond legal action, of course, is harassment or worse on the part of ICE if they do discover that you have, shared footage of them. So that, I think, would be the risk. You may have a right to do it, but that doesn't mean your right will be respected by ICE, particularly since they don't like when their bad acts are exposed very often.
That is quite true. Thank you, Darius. We've got a question here from Michelle, which I think, Michelle, you already touched on this a little bit, but might be helpful to reiterate. Is it legal for ICE to represent themselves as police, either in their uniform or verbally when they introduce themselves to persons they encounter?
Thanks, Jackie. I just wanted to add just one quick thing to Darius, to his answer, which came up when we were talking before the webinar, which is also related to cleaning up your social media, which is if you're posting those photos and whatever content goes with it is somehow interpreted as threatening, that puts you at risk in terms of the retaliation and potentially being charged with something. So that's an example of how you want to be very careful about what kind of content is on your social media. In terms of the legality of representing themselves as police, they can legally announce themselves as police. They are law enforcement agents. Unfortunately, obviously, this is extremely confusing for community members. The part where it gets into potentially legally questionable territory is really what goes along with that. So the idea that they're doing a certain type of investigation, the representation of them as doing something that requires you to let them in, such that the encounter is no longer a consensual encounter. So I would actually encourage you all to, again, look at our toolkit for more information on that, but also that LA Times article that's linked in the presentation. I think the title of it is it legal for ICE agents to represent themselves as police? And it talks about some of the challenges, legal challenges that advocates are making to the ruses that ICE agents engage in when they go to people's homes and pretend to be doing an investigation.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And just to build off that a little bit, I'll direct this one at you as well. We're getting a couple questions in around filming ICE arrests in courthouses. Could you give us a little bit more clarity on the legality or illegality of this?
Sure. So I think this one actually might be best directed at Darius, but I think, there are certain public spaces where there are restrictions on filming, and you have to respect those rules, or obviously you run the risk of being stopped, but also potentially having some additional kind of action taken against you. In terms of public spaces, completely public spaces, I think those are different than spaces like courthouses, which have restrictions on filming. Darius, if you want to add to that, it might be best for you to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. Pretty much all public spaces you are allowed to film, but places like courthouses, sometimes hospitals or medical facilities, I mean, obviously that's not where you usually will see a raid, but to the extent you're filming ICE taking somebody into custody in a hospital, that might also be prohibited. Certain workplaces may have, rules or policies prohibiting filming, but generally in public spaces, you absolutely have the right to film law enforcement agents which of course ICE agents are.
All right, thank you both for those responses. I have a question here that I'm going to direct at Polly and also invite our colleague Dalila, who's here in the room with us, to respond to. This is around the securing electronic devices, and Polly had mentioned that it's a good idea to secure your devices as well as clean up your social media, and had a couple of questions on what exactly does that mean? Could we be a little bit more specific? So Dalila, do you want to add to that?
Yes. So in terms of securing your devices, this is all based on your individual risk assessments of what you expect your risk may be, or anticipating contact with an ICE team or member. So what we would recommend is, especially if you want to secure your phone, the reason that we say to avoid Touch ID, first of all, is that Touch ID, your fingerprint is considered a part of your body, which police may force you to give up. So we recommend securing your phone with an alphanumeric passcode of at least 6 characters. Those are just harder to brute force. It takes a longer time to crack a 6-digit code than it does a 4-digit code. And so please avoid the patterns and the Touch IDs. And then in terms of preparing before you come into contact with anyone, is backing up your phone. So make sure to back up all of your data on an external drive that will not be on location with you, and delete any unnecessary data. This includes apps. Apps include a ridiculous amount of permissions and information about you, which can put you at risk should ICE or police gain access to your phone. And this includes, as a lot of us work for NGOs and nonprofits, if you have copies of your emails, your contact information, your partners on your phone, we would recommend disabling and deleting that before you come into a risky situation. And so, and also, if you were to avoid being connected to any sort of public Wi-Fi once you get to any site outside of your home, if you do connect to Wi-Fi, we recommend that you use a virtual private network, VPN. There are numerous free VPNs and also paid services out there. Finally, in the highest risk sense, we recommend that if you are not planning on filming, or if it is too risky to film, to try to keep your phone turned off. The encryption on your phone is really the only time it's fully encrypted is when it is turned off. So, like I said, unless you're planning on filming or continuing to film, try to turn your phone off as soon as possible. Finally, if it's such a risk that then we recommend that you either do not bring your phone, use a different sort of device to capture video, if you plan on doing that, or you bring a clean or burner phone which has been stripped of any identifying information with you. Finally, one more note on social. Sometimes associating yourself with the groups and partners you work with may put you at risk, not necessarily of a raid, but of perhaps surveillance or targeting. So removing your job title, for example, if you don't use it for those purposes, from your social media feeds, removing any identifying pictures and logos, and even at some points unfriending people you wouldn't want to put at risk by being associated with you.
And just to add to that, I would also include, detagging yourself from protests or demonstrations or pictures with activists or organizers that you know are at risk of deportation or are high-profile targets. These are all little things. We do know that FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, they actually have people that go through social media profiles. So these are all ways that you can, quote-unquote, clean up your social media.
Yes, thank you both. And just one last quick question that I think is related to this before we wrap up. We have a question about would we or would we not recommend including pictures of immigrants when creating flyers, announcing Know Your Rights presentations, DACA workshops, etc. What do you think, Polly?
So I would say that unless you can get consent from that person, don't include pictures. What I've seen with a lot of Know Your Rights presentations and flyers are people use illustrations or graphics a lot, and I think that that's a really good alternative if what you're trying to invoke is some sort of human element. But yeah, I would definitely not use any photos of immigrants unless you get their consent.
Thank you. And so with that, we're going to wrap this up. There's a lot of questions in here about resources and suggestions for tools and apps. We are going to follow up to this webinar with an email that has a bunch of links to different resources that we would recommend. As Polly mentioned, there's a lot on the Witness Library website, library.witness.org, including a very short tip sheet on how to film ICE that includes a lot of guidance that was covered today. Immigrant Defense Project also has a lot of content on their website. So we will be sharing that with everybody. So thank you for all the great questions. We'll also be trying to follow up on these in a blog post where we can respond to more with a little bit more time and space. And before we close out, just want to end on a positive note. Recognize that we're bringing a lot of kind of overwhelming and sometimes scary information into this. So Polly, would you mind just letting us know what we can do that's positive?
Sure. So as Jackie said, we wanted to wrap up and end today on a hopeful note, because I do think we have a lot to be hopeful for thanks to incredible community and grassroots organizations all around the country. So this illustration is from the Here to Stay campaign led by United We Dream, who, if you aren't familiar, are a wonderful youth-led immigration organization that spans across the country. We also have this quote from an organizer with an incredible grassroots organization in New York City called DRUM, which stands for Macy's Rising Up and Moving. And I really think together this sums up what we're trying to achieve, why we're joining webinars like this and trying to educate ourselves and equip our communities with tools to not just defend ourselves, but invest in each other. We're here to stay, and this work can't get done without all of us demanding to love and protect each other. So thank you all for joining today's webinar and learning with us and helping us to learn. We really look forward to the next webinar where we'll actually get to hear from some of these incredible grassroots organizations mentioned. And we hope that you can join us for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And that next webinar is July 18th. We hope to see you or hear you there, and we'll be in touch shortly. Thanks so much.